So let's talk about some potential replacements. Joe, obviously with Harbaugh going to the Chargers, there's obviously a hole to fill at the head coaching position. Let's start with a couple of candidates. Now, it's being reported by a lot of people already that Sherrone Moore, their offensive coordinator, who did step in a lot this past season as the interim, that he was going to be the heir apparent next head coach for Michigan if Harbaugh were to leave. We've had this conversation before, and if you remember, Joe, remember when I told you that Michigan should kick the tires on Kalen DeBoer? It's funny that literally Kalen DeBoer is now at Alabama, but do you remember that conversation that we had that Michigan should kick the tires? I still think they need to do that. Don't make Sherrone Moore the end-all, be-all for you, at least in my opinion. But what do you think? Let's go through some of these candidates. What do you think they ultimately do, and who are some other candidates that you think could get the job at Michigan?
Yeah, so some of the other names that we've kind of seen thrown into the conversation, Lance Leipold from Kansas, Chris Kleiman from Kansas State, who I think that Lance Leipold justifiably belongs in the conversation, a Midwest guy, but I would argue I think Chris Kleiman might be a better candidate because he's got such a long history of being a successful head coach at the FCS level where he won multiple national championships. If you want to bring somebody in who's going to raise your program and continue that standard, I think Chris Kleiman's a really underrated name to consider. And then Dave Clawson from Wake Forest. But here's at the end of the day to bridge off of the point that you just made. If you're going to interview outside candidates, you sure as shit better move quick. You better move really freaking quick because we just saw an example of what happens if you don't with Alabama. Then Alabama's not hurting. They're hurting. They're not in like a complete doomsday messed up situation. They retained some of their talent, but they lost a lot of talented kids. They lost two of the top freshmen from this past year, and we spent 2 weeks talking about the severity of losing some of the guys that they did and what Kalen DeBoer needs to do and all that crap. They have a perfect example sitting in front of them. Luckily, signing day is far enough past that they need to know and make this decision quick without losing any guys.
All right. So here we go. I'm going to say something that's unpopular, okay? And Alex, we'll get to your super chats right after this. I'm going to say something that's unpopular. I don't know if Sherrone Moore should be the guy. Like, I understand what he did for you in the interim. Joe, you cannot be scared of players hitting the portal, though, okay? I get this whole narrative. Well, guys are hitting do you want guys hitting the portal? It's so late in the process. Joe, you got to make the right head coaching hire. Like, are we going to be here in 3 years saying, oh, well, Michigan needs to move on for Sherrone Moore. He's learning on the job. He's making bad decisions on the job. It's different being in the interim, okay? And I know that he won a high-profile game this past year. But I don't know if Michigan is the place for your first head coaching job. Joe, as a Notre Dame fan, you're learning this right now. Like, you're literally learning this right now if you're Notre Dame. Ohio State fans, you've learned it with Ryan Day of guys learning on the job. I am not completely saying that Moore should not be the next head coach of Michigan. You better do your due diligence, though, and make sure he's your guy, because there are dudes out there like Chris Kleiman, a guy like Lance Leipold, who, by the way, John, I'm just going to tell you, the guy that they should go hire is Lance Leipold. Like, he is the dude that they should go and hire because he's been in the Midwest. He's a tough-nosed dude. He's going to develop at an insane level. You could make the argument, Joe, right now in the last 3 years, he's been the best developer of talent based off of what he saw at Kansas.
Wait, who is he really developed, though, at Kansas?
It does, Joe, he's taken no-star dudes, and they've gotten an 8-win season.
I think that's less development, more taking advantage of knowing how to use his roster effectively. but I get what you're saying. Wait. I'm pushing back on this because
but hold on one second. Development, though, is putting your players in the right position to let them make plays.
Okay, but I push back on the Lance Leipold being such a greater option than Sherrone Moore or some of these other guys. I like him as a coach, but what big games has Lance Leipold won as a Power 5 coach? We're kind of going off of this assumption that he has raised the floor.
Kalen DeBoer, but your argument about Kalen DeBoer is
Kalen DeBoer beat Oregon twice. Kalen DeBoer beat Oregon twice and won the Pac-12 championship
twice. Good job.
But Lance Leipold hasn't done any of that. And I know that it's hard to win at Kansas. What he has done is a very difficult thing, but is he more of a Kansas coach?
Was ranked 2 years ago.
That Texas team wasn't very good, though. They
shouldn't have been.
That Texas team?
Yes.
That Texas team didn't fit.
Remember the fullback that got the Chili's? Or was it Applebee's NIL deal? They asked the fullback after he scored a 2-point conversion, what are you going to do? And he goes, I'm going to Applebee's.
I just don't think that Leipold is this blatant, clear next great head coach. I don't think that he is. I think
you're a buffoon.
I at least have evidence of Sherrone Moore winning important football games. He's done it with the Michigan roster, with the current Michigan roster, and all you hear about is how all the players love Sherrone Moore.
He won a big game.
Beating Ohio State is the most important game of the season for them.
Who put that roster together? Who put that coaching staff together? By the way, Mentor's probably going to leave, and he's got to hire a DC. Now, it's probably going to be their D-line coach. Who was y'all's D-line coach at Notre Dame? Mike Elston?
Yeah, well, Elston's
probably going to elevate Elston. But
probably
this isn't just on the field. Joe, you can take a game or a few games from somebody who built something, right? COOs do this for CEOs all the time. Hey, I'm going on vacation. Run the business. Make sure that you don't run it into the ground. I've already established all of this for you. Joe, we're not talking about a 1-year deal. We're talking 2, 3, 4, 5-year deals where coaches are going to leave. He's going to have to recruit. He's going to have to develop. This is not just a microwave McDonald's going through the drive-through scenario. This is at minimum a 3-year deal here.
He has at least been a part of building the current structure of the success. Wouldn't you want to keep someone
that was the same for Urban, and to them, has it worked?
Okay, I have been critical of Ryan Day, but at the same time, it's not like Ryan Day's driven that thing into the ground. Ryan Day has fallen short against Michigan, which has hindered their progress, but he's put together some damn good teams. I mean, he put CJ Stroud into the NFL, and I know that we had this whole debate about if they misused him or not.
Is Michigan going to be able to recruit better than Ohio State?
I honestly, okay, first of all, Michigan's recruitment capabilities are different than Ohio State's because of the fact that there are different academic standards that are required for Michigan and whatnot. It is one of the most academically prestigious public schools in the country. It's not easy to get into. It's very, very hard to get into. And I'm sure that is going to run into it. And we see that with a lot of the guys that they bring in are of the Notre Dame, UCLA caliber, Stanford caliber guys that end up going there. So that's something to consider. But I know that Sherrone Moore can recruit at Michigan because I know he wasn't the head coach, but he is a key integral part of bringing in key important players to Michigan. He has been there for that. He knows how to recruit guys and how to sell guys that. I don't know if Lance Leipold or Chris Klieman can do that.
One side of the football and one position group. You cannot, Joe, now look, it's going to come off for the way that I am saying this, that I don't like Sherrone Moore or that I don't think that he would have success in Michigan. That's not what I'm saying. Let me reemphasize what I'm trying to say here, okay? He cannot be your only option.
I don't disagree with that. I think you need to pick up the phone, talk to all these people, and move quickly.
I got to be honest. I don't think he can be your number one option.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. Well, it is a massive risk when you hire a first-time head coach that's never been a head coach anywhere else.
Let me ask you this, though. Don't you think that say Sherrone Moore is your contingency plan. Say that is it sounds like you should consider him more as a contingency plan rather and consider these guys as primary options. But if that's the truth, do you think that Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, Matt Rule, Dave Clawson, any of these candidates that were already floated out there, do you think any of those guys are going to be willing to step in immediately with impending sanctions being dropped on the program? Like
No,
that's going to scare a lot of these guys away.
that's a completely different argument. You bring up a good argument. I don't know if those guys would be taking that. All I'm saying is you got to go and try and get them. But I've also seen coaches that come in under sanctions that get a longer leash and a longer extension and a bigger buyout because they have things that they have to overcome. Okay. Now, we'll talk about that probably in a minute because we'll talk about kids hitting the portal and all this other stuff. I like Sherrone Moore. I think he's going to do good at Michigan. I think I honestly believe he's going to be the guy at Michigan. But you can't get wrapped up in emotions. Okay, he was a part of being the OC on a team, Joe, that won you the national title. I also remember us coming here in the postgame show when they played Washington and saying they had some, like him going against the run, like them starting to throw the ball in the second half when Donovan Edwards was out there running dudes over, right? Like they got away from their game plan and made it a closer game. I just don't know if Michigan or some of these blue blood, and I use that word because fans like that word. I don't know if being a first-time head coach at a prestigious program like Michigan is the way to always go. It has worked out for some places, but some of these coaches that I'm going to mention have had head coaching experience elsewhere. I think the Ed Orgeron 2019 national champion thing is so overblown. But, Joe, let me ask you this question. If Harbaugh wouldn't have been suspended and he would have left, let's say he would have left last year, who would have been your top choice?
Well, Sherrone Moore wouldn't have been because he had one less year under his belt and he had less time. I don't even know
because he didn't run things into the ground, which, by the way, Harbaugh was at practice every day throughout those weeks. Every day he was at practice. They had a game plan that they executed. All I'm saying is you cannot be scared to go and get somebody else because, oh, well, Sherrone Moore was in the interim. You don't have to. Can I be real with you? When people do that, it sometimes feels a little bit lazy to me.
I don't think it's lazy. I would agree it's lazy that if you had an assistant who had less glowing review, this is such a unique circumstance. I honestly personally think. Like, I think that Sherrone Moore is even more of a slam dunk of a decision and more of a go-to decision than the Ryan Day decision for Ohio State. Like, Ryan Day made sense, but I don't think a lot of people are like, oh my God, like you have to hire Ryan Day. You have to hire Ryan Day. It was, a little bit less excitable. I think that with Sherrone Moore here, so many people have given him glowing reviews over the past year and a half. So many people have said that Sherrone Moore is eventually going to be a great head coach somewhere. And you might miss out on that opportunity to promote him and have him be that next great head coach. Now, it sounds extremely hypocritical for me to say that because I've been frustrated by Marcus Freeman. But the reality of it is if Marcus Freeman does become the capable head coach that he is able to be, I would feel pretty shitty if they moved on from him and then he goes and ends up being a hell of a coach somewhere else. I think the other part of this, though, Blake, and I said this earlier, and it doesn't sound like you agree with me, but I think you should be fearful of guys leaving in the transfer portal. I think if you promote Sherrone Moore, none of these guys are going to willingly leave because they have already been through battles with this guy and they're willing to be a part of what the vision he's trying to build going forward. The best way to hit the ground running into next year is by retaining your roster and it not leaving. And if you have Sherrone Moore compared to other guys that weren't recruited by Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, whoever it might be, those guys staying is only going to help this team continue to have momentum. And if you want it to have momentum, you hire Sherrone Moore. If not, you want to start from scratch, go with another one of these guys.
For the immediate future, I think you're right. But some of those guys, Joe, in the next 2 years, 67% of them will not be there. So in less than 2 years, 60% of that roster is going to be brand new dudes that Moore brings in there anyway. I get what you're saying. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but we're living in the drive-through microwave society. Joe, not this year, but next year, 60% of that roster is going to be brand new dudes that were never under a Harbaugh because they got so many guys leaving. The incoming freshman class, they've never been coached by Harbaugh. None of them. This is Sherrone Moore's class now. Regardless if you want to believe it or not, but it is. None of them have been under Harbaugh. And we'll, like you said, we'll talk about the guys hitting the portal in just a minute. I just don't think you can be scared to not want to hire a guy that doesn't have any head coaching experience. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Joe, I'm wrong. Now, before I know I can feel Michigan fans in the comments already, okay, coming after me and saying some crazy things. Well, let me say this, and there is one coach that I do think that I would always call just no matter what. Joe, I think he's going to be good there. I think the culture is established there through Harbaugh. I don't think this would be a bad hire, right? Like I think it's a good, solid hire. I just don't know if he can get you over the hump where you've been and where you consistently want to be. That's the only thing that I'm saying, because I think it's going to be so tough for a new head coach to do that. I've seen Ryan Day struggle as an example. It's just a very difficult task to overcome. And by the way, he's got to replace the biggest coach on his entire staff. Harbaugh's already taken a staff member with him. He's taken the strength coach with him. That is the biggest hire a coach can make in football, is a strength and conditioning coach. So already off the bat, Sherrone Moore has to make the most significant hire. Joe, I play college football. You play college football.
Yeah.
You spend more time with your strength and conditioning coach more than anybody. Literally.
Yeah, but I just don't know why you don't trust him to make that hire and make that decision.
It's not that I don't trust him. Why is it only in college? Joe, it's like everywhere else in society, like if you go get a new job out of college, or if you try to apply to a position for another job and you have no experience, the likelihood is people aren't going to want to put you as their COO of their company when you have no experience.
But he does.
It's the only place where you could say, hey, this guy has no head coaching experience, so we can hire him because he's a good OC.
I mean, that's like that in any sport, but also like I think with any job, there's two routes to go about it. Do you hire somebody that was is an established head coach at a smaller program? I think that has risks that are not usually talked about much, because sometimes those guys don't know how to take that next step and really work with a talented roster to be in a national championship conversation. They're really only capable of building up a shitty program.
Yes. If Eli Drinkwitz said yes, would you not want
Yeah, I would pick up the phone and I would take Eli Drinkwitz before I would take Lance Leipold, but his name hasn't been brought up once.
All right. Can I tell you something?
What?
I don't know if I wouldn't give Eli a call. I know Michigan fans are going to hate that. He's a dork. He doesn't know what to do. He has recruiting limitations at Missouri. He's not going anywhere. I'm just going to tell you, he ain't going to Michigan. But
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions, with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.